Hello, and welcome to Canterbury Shakespeare Festival's podcast/video series, Exit Pursued by Bard. That's the 14th time I've got that wrong. I'm joined today by Niara, who is the director of the experimental show Peter Ignez. Hello, Niara. So, tell us a bit about Peter Ignez.
Okay, so we're starting there. Peter Ignez is an experimental show, very much experimental. So the main idea behind it is that it's not a Shakespeare play. So what I've done, I've taken Renaissance poetry, Portugal, and Shakespeare sonnets, and wrote it as a play telling the story of Peter Ignez. Peter was a medieval king in Portugal, and Ignez was his lover. And, you know, it is a bloody story. It ends with death, people taking hearts out of other people's chests. And yeah, so very Shakespearean.
Very kind of, bloody Macbeth.
Exactly,
isn't
yeah.
It?
And it's a revenge play. I mean, it's a revenge story, and one of the things I like most about Shakespeare is his revenge plays, like Titus Andronicus and Coriolanus, and I just like, I really love a good revenge story. I guess
There's
that's
something,
a bit of a dark side in me.
Yeah, well, there's something really sort of satisfying about a revenge story, because as long as you can justify why they're seeking revenge, the audience is with them.
Yeah, exactly. And it really touches a lot of things that we feel as humans. And it's a great way to kind of, you know, like Aristotle said, you know, theater can act as a catharsis of sorts. So it kind of drains all of these feelings that we have as a society, and I think that's very important in theatre.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the theatre is very much a mirror to human life. I mean, all art is in some way or not, but I think theatre is, because you've got that immediacy of it's happening in front of you.
Exactly.
It's kind of quite key that you have to be able to see things in the story that you enjoy. So, when did you join CSF, and what made you join CSF? Or inspired you rather than made you, unless you were forced?
I've done was so we are 2021, 2019 with Mabel, and I did King Lear, or just Lear. Why did I? It was the only play I auditioned for, because I really loved Mabel's pitch and the idea of having Lear as a woman and as a story of this descent of madness, deeply centered in womanhood, is something that really resonated with me. And yeah, it was so much fun. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it was a great show. I remember really enjoying it. For anyone who didn't see it, it was an experimental piece that cut down normally like the 3.5 hour Lear into only about an hour, I think it was.
Yeah,
just over an hour.
Like that.
It wasn't very long, and it was very heavy on a female Lear and what that did to the story and to the play, and it was really effective. Mabel did a really good job. All the cast did as well. But and it was at St. Stephen's Church and the Beanie, which were two really picturesque locations for that play. They really added something, I think.
Yes, I absolutely loved doing it in St. Peter's Church, despite all the problems with the sound, and because it's a church is made for choir singing, not for acting. But I think after the first day, we really got to understand how it works, and the Beanie was so much fun, and we had to be so creative with how with exits and where we would stay, but it was great.
It's definitely one of the nice things about doing not an experimental show, but also just a show that has to go to more than one venue. Is you have to really
Yeah.
think on your feet.
Yes. And how the space really impacts the play, and it sort of creates a different container. So a Lear descending into madness in this really picturesque church, very dark, very gloom, is very different from a Lear descending into madness around, because the beanie is very bright, right? So, and it's very open, and you have, a mummified cat and marbles. And I think the space really does add different layers to the plays. And I think that's one of the great things about being able to do the experimental play at the festival, is that you can play with this. You can, maybe because people are expecting less because it's an experimental play, I don't know, but you can really go all out with it, and I think that's great.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. I think there is a level of people aren't quite sure what they're expecting from an experimental piece, even if it's got the name of a Shakespeare play. People aren't quite sure what they're going to get, so they have. It's not that they have low expectations; they just have no expectations. So anything you do is going to be interesting to them. That's why I really like Peter Ignez, because in this country we've never heard of Peter Ignez. They're not it's not a story we're familiar with. Yeah. But it's different in Portugal. It's like massive.
No, exactly. Peter Ignez for us is like Romeo and Juliet. But it's actually real history, right? But everyone knows the story. Everyone has studied it. Everyone knows the legends. Everyone knows the facts. It's just something that is so ingrained in our cultural fabric, as much as Romeo and Juliet is ingrained in England's cultural fabric. And this is one of the things that makes me love theater, is that you can bring all of the bits and pieces of yourself as an artist. The bits and pieces of Niara as someone who grew up in Portugal and grew up with the stories, and the bits and pieces of Niara who has been living in the UK for the last 3 years and loves Shakespeare, who studied English Lit at university. And you can join all of this and create something that I hope will be very beautiful.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. No, yeah, it's a really good point, because the especially I would say directing more so than acting, and especially if you've written the script yourself or you've compiled the script yourself, you put a lot of who you are into the play. Because it is incredible. Directing, I think, is the most subjective of all of the parts in a theatre piece, because you're putting your slant on a play, and it could be completely different to what somebody else thinks. Like one of the really rich things about Shakespeare is that almost every play can have a million different interpretations by a million different directors and only have the smallest overlaps in the ideas. And I think that's what's great about him. So that actually moves on nicely to our next question, which is, why do you think Shakespeare is important? Why do you think the story of Peter Ignez is important to bring to England, and what do you like about them?
Why do I think Shakespeare is important? Wow.
Yeah, it's a big question.
So the year is 2012, right? And I'm in the theater and I'm watching Sangue Means Blood. And it's an adaptation of Titus Andronicus by a Portuguese artist and director. Well, I feel bad about not saying the name, so I'm going to say. So his name is David Pereira Bastos. And one of the main part is also played by the fantastic actress Monica Calle. And this has been almost 10 years ago, right? And in a different language, because it was in Portuguese, of course. And and if I sit now and close my eyes, I can still feel the electricity that ran through my body throughout that play. So, and it's very, very difficult. And Shakespeare is old, right? 500 years away from us. And still, at that point in time, this Portuguese kid who loves theater is, in her theater all by herself and feeling literally electrified because of a story he wrote, of a play he wrote in a completely different language.
400 years ago.
Exactly. So that's why I think Shakespeare is so important, because, I mean, like people say, there is the fun quote saying that everything is a footnote to Plato in philosophy. And I think almost everything is a footnote to Shakespeare in theater. And I guess it just captures people's imagination everywhere around the world. And when, after I learned English and I could actually read Shakespeare in English, and it's just so beautiful. The language is so beautiful. I don't know, it just really feels like it's inspired. I mean, like the big inspiration. That's why I think Shakespeare is so important. Okay, that was a rant.
No, it was perfectly salient. I understood everything you were saying, and I think it's a really good point. Yeah, the language and the stories that he tells are kind of timeless. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Which is your favorite play?
It's Macbeth.
Yeah, I thought. Yeah. So tell why Macbeth then?
First of all, Lady Macbeth, right? I mean, such a strong character. I mean, contemporary filmmakers and playwrights should, go to the basics and, do you want a multi-layered, strong female character that is not flat, that has, go to Macbeth. And I think, and I love that. And again, as we were talking, the interpretation, it's very, very personal, right? But I think Macbeth is a very sad tragedy. Whilst Titus Andronicus is a very violent tragedy, Macbeth is just so deeply sad. You kind of feel like at some point you want to go to Macbeth, I feel, and, okay, child, sit down, take a deep breath, cry a little bit. And and then we start building upon that. And I guess I really love that. And also one of my main academic interests is I did an MA in religious studies, and is the role of prophecy and divinatory traditions, right? And Macbeth is the main thing people talk about when they talk about self-fulfilling prophecies. For instance, if he hadn't heard the Weird Sisters, would anything happen in Macbeth? And I think it's a very, very interesting point to make in a religious study term. But also, because most of the Shakespeare plays have something to do with fate, right? And Macbeth is where this idea of fate is much more explicit. And one of the things that make the tragedies, I think, such tragedies, is that the characters feel bound by the fate, right? So they cannot do anything else except follow their fates.
Stories can only ever end one way.
Whilst, for instance, in comedies, there is also the idea of fate, but it's a fate that you laugh at and that you laugh with. And that's why everything ends well then, because you cannot take fate seriously. When you take fate seriously, you end up in tragedy. So I mean, that's my interpretation, at least. And I think it's just so layered, and you can do so many things with it. And I just really love it.
No, definitely. Macbeth is definitely, I mean, there's a reason that probably second to Romeo and Juliet, it's the most studied play in this country.
Yeah.
And definitely one of the most performed. It's very, very timeless. And I think what you said about Lady Macbeth as well, if you want to write a good female character, studying Lady Macbeth is definitely top of your list of things to do before you kind of set pencil to paper. Especially because she's also a bad guy. Like, she's not a nice character.
No, definitely. She you know, her and Macbeth's role are almost, reversed, right? She is the hard ass. She is the one who takes the ball and says, you have to do this. You have to kill him. You're going to be king. And he's much more like henpecked almost. And yeah, exactly, she is not nice. I don't love the Lady Macbeth because she's nice, because I want to be like her, or because she's a motherly figure. She is just, again, 500 years ago, someone thought that women have the right to be more than motherly or wifely, or that they can be nasty and mean without being a witch.
Or without being crazy, because I think that's something that I've noticed, and Charlotte's pointed out to me a lot as well in films, mainly films, is if the bad guy is a woman, without rare exception, they're the bad guy because they're insane, rather than just because they're a nasty person, which I think is a really damaging idea. I mean, it's damaging that, just because you have mental health problems does not necessarily mean you're a bad guy.
Yes.
That's incredibly damaging in itself, but yeah, it limits too much, I think.
Yeah, because men can be evil and mean and power hungry just because they are, and women usually have something that justifies somehow their meanness. But women can be just so feminist. Women can be terrible people. Just
exactly.
Yeah.
We're equal opportunity.
I'm gonna be cancelled.
I can think of some evil women who are evil just because, but they're quite powerful and in the government, so I won't name who they are.
Yeah.
In case they ever see this and decide to take us down. So we'll move briefly onwards. Do you have a favourite quote?
Yes. So my favorite quote would be from Macbeth, and is the "Stars, hide your fires. Let light not see my deep dark desires." And it's just beautiful language. I'm a sucker for a good alliteration, and that just on point. Plus, it also shows the vulnerability that I was talking about, that I feel that Macbeth shows, because he is aware of the internal processes that is happening with him, and he is aware that it's not good, and it's not justified, and he feels ashamed. And one of the things that I think is most tragic about Macbeth is that he takes everything to the last consequences, because he cannot let himself feel the shame of what he did. And it's a great lesson for us all, to be honest, to just
Yeah, definitely.
sit with our shame and accept it, and instead of trying to hide it or bury it through even more convoluted actions. So that's my favorite. But one of my other favorite quotes is actually a very simple one, and it's from The Tempest. I love The Tempest. And he's right at the end, not at the end, but it's Act 4. And Ariel turns to Prospero and asks, do you love me, master? No. And it's such a simple question, simple line, but you can interpret that in so many different ways. And I don't think, two directors will interpret this question the same way. And I think that just shows the genius of Shakespeare, how you can think about so many possibilities for the interpretation of one very simple quote.
And the versatility of Shakespeare is that you can almost build a production, or certainly a concept of a production, around one quote like that and your interpretation of it, and then pull that apart and sort of layer it across the entire text. That's what I really like about Shakespeare,
yes,
is the versatility of his language. So I'm going to ask you one last question now, and this is a surprise question. I haven't told anyone I'm telling.
Oh, no.
No, I know, I'm sorry. But if you could have any part in any of Shakespeare's plays, which part would it be?
Oof.
It's a tough one.
It is a very tough one. I don't know. I'm not a funny person, so no comedies for me.
Oh, fair enough.
Definitely not funny. I guess I'm going to be very, very, very well, I guess it would be Macbeth.
It's a good choice. It's a good, solid choice.
I don't know. I'm not a great actress, right? So you just feel like, yeah. I guess it would probably be Macbeth. I don't know.
It's a fun part. It's a good part. You get a nice, juicy storyline to get into. And I think one of the things I really like about Macbeth is he has a really clear-cut journey from kind of unambitious soldier to king to dead. And it's a classic Stanislavski arc.
Yes, you talked about Stanislavski, and I would say that I think I would probably also like to play Othello.
Othello, again, an amazing arc. Yeah, you're still there. Very.
Okay.
Yeah, very detailed, I think, Othello. He's got a very sort of lovely arc throughout the play. Well.
Yes, and it's.
No, go.
Yeah, and it's, I guess, I mean, it's not like the most obvious play when it comes to Shakespeare. But yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think those are two very strong choices there. I'd be very interested to see either of them. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much, Niara, for sharing your answers with us. And we hope to see you all again next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.